So for starters, if you weren't here yesterday, let's do a quick overview, a review. What I said yesterday is that I really believe that purposeful communication has a couple of key tasks, right? There's four things at least that we want to be doing when we're communicating and we're trying to influence people. And guys, this isn't specifically real estate sales skills. This is just when you're communicating and trying to use your language to be influential. What are we trying to do? Number one, we're trying to build trust and we're trying to build rapport in relationship, because in order to be influential, people have to like you and they have to trust you. And we spent some time yesterday talking about the biologic nature of trust and relationship and all that stuff, and go back and watch that in the video. But the first thing that we've got to do before we go anywhere else is we've got to start to build a relationship. We've got to build trust and rapport. And when we've done that, as we do that, we're trying to help people create clarity. Because if we're trying to influence decisions and action, people will not take a step if they don't have clarity. You know, I heard one time the definition of courage, and I think it relates to a quote from Martin Luther King that talks about that sometimes you have to take the first step on the staircase, even if you don't see the whole staircase. And that was a paraphrase. You know, Dr. King was far more eloquent than I am. But the idea is people won't take action if they're not clear on where they're going. And so the second thing that we need to do in our communication is, after we build trust and rapport, is we've got to start to find ways to help them become more clear in their own thinking. And there's techniques to do that. Step number 3 is facilitate a decision. We're trying to get people to not just become clear, but to become clear and to decide and to choose something. And guys, the decision is the key. And look, the decision to hire you, the decision to list with you, the decision to buy that house is a better paycheck than the decision to not list with you. But what jams us up as agents is when people can't decide or don't decide or refuse to decide. Because then what happens is we got everybody in limbo and nobody's making a decision. Our job is to build trust, rapport, create clarity, facilitate decision, and then inspire people to take action, because decisions without action is useless. It is useless. The only thing that transforms is action. And so we need to facilitate decisions. We need to inspire action. These are the 4 tasks that our communication needs to accomplish if we're going to be successful. And there's techniques that we started to talk about last time. I'll go through these quickly. You can go back and watch the video. We talked about Albert Morabian from UCLA in the 1970s, who did a study that decoded human communication and said 7%, only 7% of communication is the words that we say. They're not inconsequential, but they don't matter as much as you think they do. 38% is how do those words get delivered? The tone of voice, the inflection in your voice, the speed of your voice. We're going to talk about voice a lot today. 55% of the communication is nonverbal. It's kind of, what am I giving off? What kind of a vibe am I giving off? How am I holding my body? What are you reading in between the lines, between what I'm saying and how I'm saying it and how it makes you feel, right? That's Morabian's rule, and they all impact communication, and we have to think about all of them. We talked about fear and logic in the brain, and how the way that the brain was built is that when we become in an emotional state, especially fear, when we become emotional, we lose the ability for logical and rational thought. And so if we're going to facilitate decision making, one of the things that we have to do is we have to find ways to minimize the emotionality and keep the logical part of the brain engaged. And a technique that we talked about last time was one that we call name it, tame it. If you can give words to what that emotion is that you're feeling, it loses its power over you. If you are in an emotional state and the logical center of your brain shuts off, and it will shut off as clear as you shut off a light switch, and you give a name to, I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling afraid, I'm feeling happy, now that logic center turns back on like a light switch, and we need it to do that. Another technique we talked about yesterday was the accusation audit. If you can give a name to your feeling, the logic center of your brain turns back on again. Or if I give a name to your feeling, you know what, Barbara, I think this is what you're feeling. You must be feeling this. If I can name it, it also works. And we talked about that. We talked about DISC behavioral style, that people are all different from each other, but they're different in predictable ways. And what we know is that there's 4 basic types of behavioral profile styles, and each different type has a couple of key fears that are the most important drivers for them. For the driver, the high Ds, the biggest fear is the fear of being taken advantage of. For the high Is, the influencers, it's the fear of rejection. For the high S's, the steadies, 2/3 of the population leads with a high steady profile. It's the loss of security and the fear that things will get out of control. For the high C's, the compliance, the detail-oriented, data-oriented people, their biggest fear is to be criticized for making a mistake. And when we know the biggest fears that drive people's behavior, we need to tailor our communication in such a way to alleviate those fears. We talked about the fact that the brain thinks in action words and it thinks in commands. We talked about the fact that the brain thinks in pictures. And part of our job is to use language that can kind of create an image, a picture, so that we can invoke an emotional state that will allow people to take an action. Again, this is recap. Go back to yesterday's video where we go in depth to understand this. We talked about the fact that we're storytellers, that the human brain loves stories. And the best stories are your own stories. And so we use the technique of questioning so that I can ask a question and you can answer the question, and we begin to piece together a narrative that creates a story that leads you to a place where you feel more confident, that leads you to a place where you feel more clear, that leads you to a place where you feel empowered to take an action. And we do that through great questioning. The same way a trial attorney asks a witness a series of questions to begin to spell out a narrative that tells a story that the attorney wants the jury to hear, we're going to learn how to practice asking great questions so that we can have our clients begin to tell themselves the story that empowers them to take action. We talked about consistency and patterns, that the brain is always looking for patterns, the pattern recognition monster. Consistency in patterns feels safe. And we talked about the fact that the brain is lazy. It takes shortcuts. And when we see a pattern begin to form, we begin to think we know where this is going to go. I start to see you behave in a certain way, and I begin to think I know all I need to know, and I don't pay attention anymore, and it leads to biases. And biases are part of being a human being. And sometimes they can lead us into some very dark and dangerous places. And sometimes they can be really helpful in terms of making quick decisions. But we talked about how important patterning is in that. And that one of the techniques that we're going to learn how to practice is to break the pattern. Because when you break the pattern, it creates a sense of novelty. It causes the brain to pay attention to what's going on. And we're going to talk about how to do that today. When finally we talked about the power of no. And we talked about the fact that human beings go back to social psychology. I realize, guys, that as a former therapist, I'm giving you a lot of psychology talk. But this is the stuff that works. As a clinician, I can tell you this is how we shape behavior, is through the language. And one of the things that we learn in social psychology, if you remember, if you ever studied Maslow's hierarchy of human needs, that the very base human need that we all have is the need for safety and the need for water and food and sleep and those physiologic needs. And once those are met, the next level up, one of the most important needs that we have is the need to feel like we are autonomous, that we are in control of our own actions, that when I do something, I can control my own destiny. And what we've learned linguistically is that one of the easiest ways to feel in control is to use the word no. When I say no to you, I am acting as an autonomous agent. I am in control, and I have evaluated what you said, and I said no. I'm in control, not you. And in the very beginning of relationship building, when we're trying to have people overcome some of the biases that they feel about salespeople, which are not usually very flattering. I don't like salespeople. They're pushy. They're bossy. It's all about them. It's all about a buck. Is we need to find a way to break that pattern, to show up and behave differently. And one of the ways that we frame questions in the early relationship, with people who we don't have a relationship with is to let them feel autonomous. A practical way of how that plays out, and then we'll jump into today's content. When we get to a place where we're trying to close for an appointment, let's think about it for sale by owner call or an expired listing call. And we get on the phone with them and we're talking to them and it seems like it would be a good idea to meet, rather than say, would you like to meet? Which is what we're hoping to hear is yes. A way for them to feel more empowered is to frame that question in a different way. We talked about this yesterday. Instead of saying, would you like to meet? How about this? Would it be a bad idea to meet? Because the answer I'm looking for there is no. And when you say no to me, you're actually feeling more in control of the process and you're more willing to go there than just saying yes. Right? These are skills that we're going to practice in these labs. And that's kind of a recap of where we went yesterday. Now, there's some new rules that I want to share with you today. And these are being recorded. These will show up on the YouTube channel as well. So you can go back and review these again. There is this rule, this concept that human beings are either moving towards pleasure or away from pain. That behavior is modified by the move towards pleasure or the avoidance of pain. And what we understand is that emotion is the driver of all action. It is the driver of all human action. People take action when there's an emotional trigger, and I'm either moving towards pleasure or I'm moving away from pain. And here's what we know. Avoiding pain is a much more reliable predictor of the action that you're going to take than moving towards pleasure. If you don't believe that's true, put your hand on a hot stove and see how long it takes to pull it off. Because avoiding pain is how you're hardwired. And one of the things that we need to be comfortable doing, guys, is we need to get comfortable at times creating a little discomfort in the lives of our clients so that they take action. We need to paint a picture in our words of a scenario that they need to choose between, and we need to make one of them uncomfortable so that they avoid it, because avoiding pain is far more predictive of your action than just wanting to get the pleasure. There's a lot of things that I would love to do. I would love to lose 20 pounds. I would love to kind of get back in shape again before COVID came and I don't go to the gym anymore. I would love to do a lot of those things. That's the moving towards pleasure. The truth of the matter is there's some pain involved in that. And so I'm avoiding the pain of that right now. Guys, when I was in graduate school, I had a professor at NYU when I was really studying to be a family therapist early on. And this was something she told me, and it stuck with me for 30 years. She said, the job of a clinician is to comfort people when they're disturbed and to disturb people when they get too comfortable. Now think about that for a second. The job of a clinician is to comfort people when they're disturbed, but to disturb people when they're too comfortable. We have to be willing, when people are comfortable, to create some discomfort for them in order for them to take action. And for a lot of us, that doesn't feel good. For a lot of us, that doesn't feel nice. We have to learn how to deal with that, right? Pain versus pleasure is a rule that we constantly need to be thinking about. How do we create scenarios where people can avoid the painful stimulus? And we're not going to poke people with a cattle prod. That's not what I'm talking about. But we do have to be able to paint those pictures. Next rule. It's the rule of self-consistency, which says that we like to kind of show up in ways that are consistent with how we see ourselves. You know, one of the questions that I often will ask someone when I'm trying to get an agreement is not, do you agree? It's, does that sound fair? And I might say it in things like this. You know, one of three things could happen tonight. You might choose to list your home with me. You might not choose to list your home with me. And that would be disappointing. And yet, if I felt that I wasn't the right fit for you and that another agent would be better able to serve your needs, I might refer you to someone else. Does that seem fair? Now, I think that sort of three-part script, one of the reasons why I love it, and we'll talk about embedded commands in a minute, there's some embedded commands right in there. The phrase list with me is embedded into that a couple of different times, speaking right into their unconscious. You might choose to list with me. You might not choose to list with me. They're hearing it in their unconscious. List with me, list with me. And the third part is this kind of quintessential takeaway. There might be a condition where you don't get me. And what makes this a pattern interrupt, we go back to patterns. What makes this different in the ears of the seller is I'm presenting the context for why I would walk away, not that I don't believe that you're motivated enough. If I don't think you're motivated enough, I'm out of here. No, that's not what it is. That's what they expect a salesperson to say. That's a resistance trigger. I'm going to put your needs first, which is not what they expect. If I don't think I'm the right guy for you, if I think that there's somebody else who would be able to do a better job than I can, then I might not take this and let them do it. Does that seem fair? And does that sound fair is the way I frequently go for agreement, because people always want to see themselves as fair, moral, operating players. And nobody wants to see themselves as unfair. And so one of the biggest discomforts that can be, we talked about pain versus pleasure. One of the biggest pain points is when people see themselves as inconsistent with their own self-image, or inconsistent, out of alignment with their own goals. When they see themselves behaving in a way that is not consistent with what they want to believe about themselves, that can be a source of discomfort. And sometimes in our scripted language, in our conversations, sometimes the strategy becomes, how do I paint this picture and reflect back this inconsistency so they are uncomfortable enough to get back in line, to do the right thing? Self-consistency is an idea that is a rule that frames a lot of how we approach some of this communication. And guys, this is stuff that we're going to think about in these labs, and we're going to think about how would I do that, and we're going to practice it. But self-consistency is a rule. Now, there's another rule that I love. It's called the self-disclosure loop. What does the self-disclosure loop say? It's a rule that says people love to talk about themselves. And if they don't want to talk about themselves, they love to talk about their kids. And if they don't want to talk about their kids, they want to talk about their houses. Now, here's the thing. What we find is, when we give people an opportunity to talk about the things that matter to them, when we give them the opportunity to disclose, to self-disclose, this is not giving people the opportunity just to talk. This is not tell me the ingredients in your favorite, recipe. This is tell me about what matters to you and why it's important to you. And what happens is when we give people the opportunity to self-disclose, a couple key things happen. First of all, the self-disclosure loop is triggered when they share their experiences and talk about things that are important to them, and when we listen. Because this disclosure loop doesn't work if we're not paying attention. If they're self-disclosing and we're saying, as we're on our phone and we're texting, that doesn't work. But when we listen, and we carefully listen, and we actively listen, what begins to happen is that there's a dopamine drip that gets released. Dopamine, which is this neurotransmitter substance, which is a kind of addictive, kind of a crack-like euphoric little hit of, this feels really good. I'm talking to you, and you know what, Barbara, I'm kind of digging this. I'm feeling good about you. What did I say the very first task of communication is to build trust and rapport? There is no better way to build rapport with someone than to pay attention to them and to let them self-disclose and to actually care and listen. I think it helps to think about DISC styles that we talked about yesterday, behavioral styles, and know what kind of matters. Are you an active driving person? Are you a relational person? Are you a data person? Kind of thinking about that so that we ask questions that allow them to self-disclose in ways that matter to them, I think is something that we're going to learn how to do. But I can tell you that self-disclosure, triggering the self-disclosure loop and letting that dopamine drip hit is one of the fastest ways to break down resistance and to build rapport. And we need to learn how to ask the questions that allow people to self-disclose safely early in the relationship so it doesn't come off like a police interrogation. Right? This is not the Mueller investigation. This is not a police investigation, but this is an invitation to tell me a little bit about what matters to you. And this is me paying attention intently. Chat light just went on. Let's see what's here. All right, Noel, you got to drop. Talk to you later. You're going to see the rest of it on YouTube. Off you go. Have a great one. All right, a couple of rules today. We talked about self-sufficiency, the self-consistency. We talked about self-disclosure loops, right? I want to talk about objections. What is an objection? There's some rules that we have to think about in terms of what happens when we get an objection and what do we do? How do we handle it? And there are some great scripts on what to say when you receive an objection. So first things first, let's talk a little bit about what an objection is and what it's not. Because there's objections and there's conditions. And the difference is that a condition is a real problem that has to be solved before I can move forward. A condition might be, I want to buy a house. And I'm ready to buy a house. I need to buy a house. I've got enough down payment money. Unfortunately, I'm furloughed right now. And no lender is going to give me a pre-qualification until I'm back to work. That's a condition that really has to be solved. It's not an objection. It's a real problem, and there's a solution to it. But objections are different. Objections are a reluctance to move forward based in fear. In what? Fear. And we talk about fear yesterday. We talked about fear in the recap. When we're afraid, the logic centers of our brain shut off. We can't solve problems when we're afraid. And so when we get an objection and we understand that it's based in fear, we need to start to explore that fear. Remember what we said yesterday, that by leaning into the fear, by giving a name to that fear, by talking about that fear, by talking about what you're afraid of, it loses its power over you. When we lean in and we have a conversation and we let people talk about the thing that they're the most afraid of, the fear centers of the brain quiet down, the logic centers of the brain get re-engaged, and now we can begin to have a productive conversation. And I think that some of our scripts go to logic too quickly when we get an objection. I'll give you an example. I'll give you the example of the commission objection. You think it's ever possible that you would ask someone what your fee is and they might object? How many people could raise their hand and say that that's a possibility? They might object to my commission. You know what? What's your fee? My fee is 6%. Oh, no, hell, that will never do. We want to pay you 9%. Now that never really happens, just so you know. But what does happen is they're afraid. And so some of the scripts, and one of the tried and tested scripts that's been out there for decades is a script that leads with logic. Now remember the image I showed you yesterday of the elephant and the rider. The elephant is the emotional brain. The rider is the logical brain. And when the elephant is in charge, the rider better hold on tight, because the rider isn't big enough or strong enough to control the elephant when the elephant is running rampant. And so we've got to quiet that elephant down and let the rider take control again. And what happens is too many of our scripts go right to logic, the part of the brain that is shut off when people are emotional. And the script says this: how much is your fee? My fee is 6%. Oh, no. Would you do it for less? Right, there's the scenario. And standard Mike Ferry 101, and I love Mike Ferry and Tom Ferry, and they've been leaders in our industry for a long time, but the script that they made very, very popular is, you know what? First one, Mike Ferry, 1985, here's his script. How would you do it for less? No. Do you have any other questions? That's actually a printed script. You can go back to Mike Ferry's books and you can pull out that script. Guys, that's a crappy script today. Because buyers today understand that fee is negotiable. They understand that there's lots of folks who are willing to negotiate fee, and to say no and to move on just it's a stereotypical thing that they would expect us to do, which becomes a resistant trigger. I'm not a big fan of that script. I'm also not suggesting that you have to cut your commission. We could have a whole nother conversation about commissions in a second. But the script goes like this: would you be willing to cut your commission? Hey, you know what? Let me tell you what I'm concerned about with that. You know, what worries me about that is if I'm so willing to cut my commission just to get your listing, then how hard do you think I would really fight for you in order to get your price? And that's a script. And we practice it again and again and again, and we role play it again and again and again. And when somebody says, would you cut your commission? And we reflexively say, let me tell you what concerns me. And we go through this script. Here's the problem. Objections are based in fear. This entire conversation is based in logic. What happens when I try to get you to behave and think logically when you're afraid? You're just not hearing it. It's like Charlie Brown's teacher in the front of the room. Wah, 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 wah. You hear something, it's just not getting in. And the more we push logic when people are afraid, the more frustrated and emotional they become, the bigger the elephant gets. Think about a child who's afraid of the monster under the bed at night. And the more you tell them that fear is silly, that you should be a big boy and not worry about that monster, the more they're thinking, you don't understand, that monster's scary. It gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So what do we need to do? Well, what we do need to do is we need to lean in. And there's a framework for handling objections. And I love this one. I'm going to go back to Jeb Blunt, one of his many, many books on sales, is his book called Objections. And he takes the standard old acknowledge, different objection handler models here. And he breaks it down into 4 parts. The first part of the objection would be what he calls the ledge. What is the ledge? It's doing something unexpected, saying something unexpected in a pattern interrupt way that isn't what they would have expected us to say, that buys us a little bit of time to start to think about what are we going to do. It's kind of an acknowledgement, right? And so here's how it might sound. If we begin with the premise that sellers think that salespeople are pushy, if we begin with the premise that there's a salesperson bias that says we're all about the buck and we're all about what's in it for me, and when the seller resists our commission, the expectation would be to push back and talk about why we're worth it. And here's what you do on the ledge. You do something different. You do something unexpected. How would you be willing to cut your commission? Oh my God, I am so happy you asked that. I was hoping you were going to ask that question. Wait, what? You were hoping I was going to push back on your commission? That's not what I expected. That's a pattern interrupt. That's a ledge. And the beauty of pattern interrupts is it causes you to tune back in and say, hey, what's going on here? And it starts to get you to pay attention. Now, I don't care what your pattern interrupt is to that question. I don't care whether your practiced, well-rehearsed response to would you cut your commission is, I'm so excited that you asked that. I was hoping you were going to ask that. I don't care if that is the very, very best question that you could have asked me. I don't care what it is, but you have to have one practiced and ready to go. And you have to just be able to go right to it. And when you do that, there's this gap, there's this break that says, hey, wait, hold up, what? That isn't what I expected you to say. And now what do? Now we lean in. We lean in because we believe that what's causing you to push back is that there's a fear. Help me understand the fear. And so we ask some questions. How would you be willing to cut your commission? I'm so excited you asked that. That's the very best question you could have asked me. Help me understand, what is it about my commission that's so troubling to you? Let them talk about it. Well, I just think it's a lot of money. I just think it's a lot of money, and somebody else is willing to do it for less money. And I don't want to, pay more money if I don't have to. The biggest fear of the high Ds is being taken advantage of, right? But what I really want you to do is just talk about it. Just talk about it. Give it a name. What are you afraid of? We're going to employ the technique of name it, tame it here. Just talk about it. Tell me what you're afraid of. Tell me about what it concerns. And what begins to happen is the emotional part of your brain shuts off and the logical part of your brain kicks back on. And once your logical brain is re-engaged, now we can have a logical conversation. And now I might even go into that script that says, can I tell you what concerns me about that? If I'm so willing to cut my commission just to get your listing, how hard do you think I'm really going to work to negotiate on your behalf? That is a logical conversation that now you can have because the logical part of your brain is back engaged. But I can't go there yet. I got to go to the fear first, right? That is a very, very basic structural approach to handling objections. First, we have a pattern interrupt that causes them to sort of buy a little time to sort of think about why did you say that? Now we explore the fear. Now we begin to start to challenge that faulty reasoning and provide a different solution. And that's how we're going to learn how to handle objections. I think old school skipped over the fear exploration. Old school leaned on authority. Would you cut your commission? No. Any other questions? Old school leaned on authority that says, would you cut your commission? Let me tell you why you're wrong. That doesn't work anymore. It doesn't work well. It'll work sometimes. A blind squirrel is going to get a nut sometimes, but it's not going to work enough. This works better because it recognizes the way that we need to kind of lean into the way the brain thinks. Now, I mentioned the voice earlier. I want to keep an eye on the time here. The voice is your instrument. 7% of the communication is the words. 38% of communication is what? It's how those words are delivered. And so we want to kind of recognize that people that seem like us are seen as safer. We're back to fear and safety. Fear and safety. Your brain is constantly trying to figure out, is this a safe situation? Is this a dangerous situation? And if you sound like me, maybe you are like me. Human beings are very tribal. And we live in tribes for a reason, because together we can protect each other, and together we can kind of leverage, each other's time and talent and all that stuff. And here's what happens. As we evolve as human beings, people in different geographic areas begin to sound different from each other because we're not in the same tribes. And it's just a hack. It's a brain hack that evolved over time to just allow us to know that you ain't from around here. And if you're not part of my tribe, I'm not sure if I trust you yet. I gotta learn about you. But if you kind of sound like me, So people in different countries develop different languages. People in large geographic regions develop different dialects. The English language sounds different in Boston than Austin, because that's just a hack that says, that Southern drawl tells me, that Boston twang tells me you're not from around here. And so if we can understand that that's critical to creating a sense of safety, one of the things that we want to learn how to do is to sound more like the people that we're talking to. And we do it through mirroring and matching. And when they're speaking faster, we speak faster. When they're speaking slower, we slow down. When they're excited, we get excited. And it's just a skill of learning how do you do that, right? How do you mirror and match in terms of the pace, in terms of the tone of voice, in terms of the volume of the voice, in terms of the inflection. Sometimes be careful with accent. Really, really, really good folks can begin to start to mirror and match dialect. Be careful, because if you are not world class, that one will get caught. And they'll be like, are you making fun of me? Are you making fun of me? That is not a way to build relationship. But this mirroring and matching does. It begins to get a sense of we're alike. We're like each other. You know, the whole premise of hypnotic trance. Trance is not taking a pocket watch and dangling it back and forth like they do in the cartoons. Trance is if I can create a sense of behavioral sympathy where we're in line with each other. When you breathe, I breathe. When you uncross your legs, I uncross my legs. When you speak louder, I speak louder. We are so much alike that you begin to trust that I'm enough like you that I'm safe. And if I'm safe, you're going to be open to suggestion from me. That's trance. Now, I'm not suggesting that we try to put our clients into a trance, a hypnotic trance. What I am suggesting is that we understand how to use this tool and be real purposeful about listening and mirroring and matching. You know, one of the exercises that I encourage you to just go out and start to mirror and match the people that you come across. If you go out to the supermarket and the cashier is speaking, listen to the speed with which he or she speaks and try to mirror and match it. Now, don't always try this at home right out of the gate, because the people that know you the best will catch you. Are you making fun of me? They will. But people that don't know you don't notice it as quickly, and it's a skill that really should be practiced. When you make a phone call, you only get 2 syllables to begin to mirror and match. You get hello. And so whether the person says hello, where they say, hello. You know, all of that gives us feedback in terms of how are we going to respond? Do we speak with that same energy level that they do? Do I tone it down if they're in a bit of a depressed pickup, right? Is there a short little staccato? You know, my sister-in-law always answers the phone, hi, this is Wendy. And if I called her, it would be, hi, this is Wendy. And my response would be, hi, this is Hal. I would mirror and match what I'm hearing because that gives us that sense of connectedness. Now, there's a couple of vocal types that you really want to learn to work within. And I take this back from the work of Chris Voss, former FBI hostage negotiator. He defines 3 basic vocal types that you want to learn how to work within. And the first one is probably the easiest one. It's just your kind of normal speaking voice. It's the one we use most of the time. And in my normal speaking voice, I'm going to try to mirror and match and pick up the pace and slow down the pace in my normal voice. And yet there's times when you might have to say something that needs a little bit of emphasis, and maybe it needs to be calming and reassuring. And that's time for the late night radio DJ voice. That's the voice. Think about the late night radio DJ, right? I don't know. I don't listen to the radio a whole lot at night, but I remember there was this woman named Elvira. I don't know if she's still on, right? You know that voice? That's this sort of slow and it's calm. And when you have to say something that needs to be calming and reassuring, and rather than talk about it in my normal voice, I need to slow it down and I need to go into that late night radio DJ voice. And it's a skill that needs to be practiced. And the third one, which you use very carefully, very judiciously, is the assertive voice, where I'm going to tell you, and I'm going to be very direct. Be careful with that one. You will need to use it sometimes, but understand that that will generate resistance, especially with a high D. You start getting alpha male with an alpha male, you're going to have a clash. Sometimes you need to lean on it, but very rarely. But you have to be ready to go there when you need to. And these are just 3 types of voice that you want to be aware of and start to think, what is the situation that I'm going to require of me? Most of the time, 90% of the time, it's just your normal speaking voice. But sometimes you got to be ready to change it up. Now, changing it up also has to do with vocal patterns. We talked about the brain being a pattern machine. It's always looking for patterns. And so pattern interruptions cause attention. When I do things unexpectedly, it causes me to pay back attention again. I'm constantly evaluating the environment. Is it dangerous? Is it safe? I think it's safe. I'm going to move on. Wait, what just happened here? There was an interruption in the pattern. And so how do we do that vocally? Well, one of those would be volume and speed changes, the way we just talked about, right? Sometimes with emphasis, when I get really excited and I really, really, really want you to understand, I'm going to pick up the volume and I'm going to pick up the pace, right? Another way to interrupt the pattern and the cadence of the voice is a pause. It's just a gap. I put a pause before something that I want you to hear. And we use that one a lot with embedded commands, right? We talked the other day about the fact that the brain responds to commands. And so we embed those commands, list with me, inside of a sentence. And if we really want to get it to work, we put a pause before the command and after the command, so that when the brain hears the cadence of the conversation and then there's a gap and it re-engages and says, what's going on? What it hears is the command. Here's how this looks. Mr. and Mrs. Seller, if you feel comfortable with what I'm about to share with you, are you prepared to list your home tonight? 2 commands. Feel comfortable, list your home. I want you to feel comfortable. I want you to list your home. Those are the commands that I'm building into that conversation. But I'm going to put a pause before it and a pause after it, because the gap causes the break in the pattern that causes you to pay attention to the command which you are incapable of not responding to, right? That's just a skill that needs to be practiced so it sounds natural. And here's what we used to do in bold. Some of you guys are bold grads. We used to clap, remember? We used to put a clap 3 times. Mr. and Mrs. Seller, if you feel comfortable with what I'm about to say tonight, are you willing to list your home with me today. We put a clap, 3 claps before and after so that you kind of got. Now, here's the deal. Don't clap in your listing appointment. Mr. and Mrs. Seller, if you feel comfortable with what I'm about to say, you're like, what the hell kind of weird Tourette's is this? I mean, give me a break. No. But you have to practice the pause because the silence does a lot of heavy lifting for you. And so it's just something we have to practice. And we talked about in terms of embedded commands, the inflections, the vocal upswings. Is everything sounding like a question? There's a lot of people that every time they talk, it seems like they're asking a question. And when we do that, and it usually comes out of our own nervousness, when we do that, it sounds like we're unsure. And so we've got to practice that. We've got to practice when is it appropriate to have that upswing in the inflection? When is it appropriate to have the downswing? Last 10 minutes of the tools. Some tools for clarification. What do we need to do in communicating? We need to build rapport. Build rapport, right? The vocal tools will help you to build rapport. Mirroring and matching helps you to create a sense of connection. That builds rapport. The second thing we need to do is we need to help create clarity. And certain tools in the toolbox help do that. One of them is the use of metaphor. Now, what's a metaphor? The metaphor is a comparison where we describe one thing in a different way. We create a different picture. The brain responds to pictures. The brain thinks in pictures. So you see this picture of the situation. I'm going to create a different picture so you see it a different way, so you understand it at a more deeply level. Sometimes we'll think of sort of poetically describing something in a new and novel way. And novelty is a big deal for the brain. The brain loves new, shiny objects. That's why we love pattern interruptions, because, hey, this is different. I love different. And things that are novel are exciting to the brain. The brain loves that. And so we use certain kinds of metaphors a lot in sales. I love fishing metaphors. Do I go fishing? I'm not really a fisherman. But I use fishing metaphors because they help people understand the market. We think about pricing the home at a level where the buyers would make an offer, and I can describe that in terms of fishing. You know, we got to put this bait where the fish are going to take it, right? It's a metaphor. It's not their house, but metaphorically it is. Desirability metaphors. You know, this is a beauty pageant, and it's a beauty pageant. And it's a horse race. We got to get this thing sold quickly, and we got to make it look good. These are metaphors. Desirability metaphors. You know, stale bread. We can't let this listing get stale. God, it's going to smell like bad fish, man. We got to get this thing sold quick. These are metaphors, and they can be really, really useful in creating clarity, where people can see it and understand it in lots of different pictures. Because with clarity comes the ability to take action. And I love creative use of metaphor as a way. And you'll hear me a lot of times when I teach, use metaphor to talk about things, because I want you to hear what I said, and I want you to hear it a different way, because metaphor is powerful. Another tool is analogy. What's an analogy? It's that terrible question on those tests in school. This is to that. Right? Dogs are to banana cream pies as cats are to what? You're like, what the heck? How do I know? That makes no sense. But these are analogies. And what we're doing is we're comparing things. And in communication, especially in sales, analogies allow us to use a parallel reasoning process. When people are stuck and they can't get unstuck, and they're too emotionally charged up about the issue to hear anything, then we take that conversation out of an emotional context into a less emotional context. Let me give you an example. Pricing a home. How many people think that a seller could get emotionally jacked up when they don't like the price of the home? Quick show of hands. Sure they will. They're angry. They're upset. They're afraid. They're afraid that they're not going to get what they need to do the next thing that they want. And so what we can do is we can try to talk to them about, look, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, if we don't price your house at the right point, we're not going to get enough buyers. And if we don't get enough buyers, you're not going to get enough for your home. And they're going to get afraid. They don't want to hear that. It only takes one. Just bring me one. And I can't win that conversation because the elephant is in control. So I got to get into something that's less emotional. And let's talk about something different. Let's not talk about your house. Let's talk about a $10 bill. Mr. and Mrs. Seller, if I gave you a stack of $10 bills and asked you to go to the supermarket and sell them to the people in the store for $5 each, do you think you could sell them all? Well, $10 bill, sell it for 5. Sure, I could do that. Terrific. If you sold them all and you came back and I gave you another stack of $10 bills and asked you to go back to the same store and sell them for $8 each, could you sell them? Heck yeah, I could sell them in 20 minutes. Terrific. If I came back another time and asked you to take your next stack of $10 bills to the supermarket and sell them for $12 each, do you think you could do it? Of course not. Of course I couldn't do that. Nobody's going to pay $12 for a $10 bill. Mr. and Mrs. Seller, that's exactly the same as your house, right? What I did is I created a logical sequence where they came to a conclusion that says no one will pay more than what it's worth. And I wasn't talking about your house, but once you've kind of run that sequence to a place where you say that makes sense, then I just shifted back into your current context. And that's an analogy. And guys, the very, very, very most skillful agents have these analogies practiced. They know which stories they're going to tell to make the analogous case, and they have them ready to go. And when the time comes that they need a pricing analogy, they're going to do that. When they need a price reduction analogy, they've got one. And so analogies are really good to use when you're in a highly emotional state, and kind of make sense here. It's going to make sense here. And so these are all the tools, right? 2 days in a row, we went through lots and lots of different tools. Where we're going here over these next few weeks, and however long we do this for, and I'm game to do this for as long as you want, is we're going to kind of take some of these ideas and some of these tools, and we're just going to break into small groups in Zoom, and we're going to practice it. We're going to play with it. And I'm going to give you scripts that we're going to role play from time to time. But more than the scripts, we're going to probably spend more time practicing how do you come up with these things in real time? How do you handle this issue in real time? We got to know which tool to use when. And what I was thinking about this morning when I threw in these last couple of slides is I'm probably going to put together a cheat sheet that I think might give you some ideas in terms of, depending on what part of the communication task we're in, what tools do I have in my toolbox? We said there's 4 things: build trust and rapport, create clarity, facilitate a decision, and initiate action. Well, when I'm building trust and rapport, I can use pattern interrupts because I know that pattern interrupts are going to be new and novel, and they're going to cause you to pay attention. I'm going to leverage the self-disclosure loop because that's going to create that dopamine drip, and you're going to love talking to me, and you're going to love being with me. I'm going to leverage DISC awareness, behavioral style awareness, and try to speak into the concerns that I think are the most relevant for you. And I will do DISC courses, maybe inside this time block, maybe outside of it. But I'll share with you some DISC. I'm a certified DISC trainer, and I've been doing this with companies for a while, just really understanding how differences in behavioral style can lead to problems in communication. And so becoming aware of that is a rapport builder, as is mirroring and matching, that vocalization that we talked about before, as is going for no, the autonomous way of you being in control. And I'm willing to let you be in control strategically. And I'm going to frame in the beginning of trust building questions where, does it sound, would it be crazy for us to do this? As opposed to, do you want to do this? Because in that no, you're going to feel more in control. And if you feel more in control, you're going to feel better about the process, right? The accusation audit, which we talked about yesterday, where I give the name to the emotion you're feeling. I'm sure you must feel that all of us real estate agents are all the same. You must feel like all we care about is just another sale, and we have no interest at all in what matters to you. That is actually an accusation audit. And that might be something that you would use early in a scripted conversation with a for sale by owner, with an expired listing, because it's what they're thinking about us, and it's causing them to not want to talk to us. And if I can put that thought on the table for them and they say, yeah, you're right, that's actually right, now they're less emotional, they're more logical, we can have a conversation. The tools that we would use in creating clarity: name it, tame it, quiet that screaming elephant, right? That emotional elephant, give it a way to lose its grip. That's a technique. Picture painting that we talked about yesterday. using questions to begin to unwind a narrative so that I can ask a question and you give me an answer and you get clear, and I ask you another question, you give me another answer, you become more clear. It's that kind of picture painting that is a tool that we would use to create clarity. Metaphor, analogy can be used to create clarity. Number 3, facilitated decision. Self-discovered stories again, right? That leads to self-consistency. We like to feel consistent with our own self-image. And when a story is being told and you're asking questions and it's leading me to a story that leads to, I am consistent with who I believe I am, I'm going to feel more comfortable making a decision. And if I need to sometimes create a little disharmony there, sometimes we have to comfort the disturbed and disturb people when they're too comfortable. Sometimes I have to create some tactical discomfort. Sometimes I've got to lead you to a story and ask questions that cause you to say, hey, wait, that's not what I want, because that's going to create pain. And pain is a more reliable predictor of action than pleasure. Last but not least, inspire action. We can use the picture painting techniques. We can use action words. We know that the brain responds to commands and action words, and we'll use those. And then finally, it comes back to the sequence that we said yesterday. And if you weren't here, it just comes down to this. When you're competent in these tools, when you've mastered the tools in your toolbox, then you become confident. And you're like, it doesn't really matter what you say because I'm ready for whatever it is. And when you've got confidence, it leads to comfort and enthusiasm, and you can present yourself with enthusiasm and comfort, and that comes off as being present and being authentic. And that's what leads to trust. And in that trust becomes the ability for people to trust you, to influence them. And so it all comes down to learning these tools. I gave you 2 days of tools, 2 hours of tools. This is going to get recorded. It's going to get popped up onto the YouTube channel. Guys, it's taken me 30 years to kind of get this stuff together. I don't expect you to have it figured out in 2 hours. But what I want you to do is to really be willing to go on a journey that says, if I can figure this stuff out better, if I can become a better communicator, it doesn't just impact my sales career. It impacts my family life. It impacts the organizations that I belong to. It impacts everything that matters. And so on Mondays and Tuesdays, we're going to play, and we're going to introduce a new tool that we're going to play with on Monday. We're going to talk about it. We're going to give some examples of it, and then we're going to break out into groups. And on Mondays and Tuesdays, we're going to run with it and practice it, because you can't just be exposed to it once. You got to do it again and again and again and again. A professional football team practices 60 hours a week for a 1 hour game, right? So that's kind of where we end this. We had a lot of tools here. I'm going to give you 2 last little statements, and it's 3 o'clock. We're going to wrap it up. Knowledge is knowing what to say. Wisdom is knowing when to say it. And having influence is not about elevating self, but it's about lifting others. I really believe that. Here's the thing I'm going to caution you about. When you know these tools, when you master these tools, you can use them in some pretty bad ways. The con man and the salesman have the same tools in their toolkit. It's just that the con man is using them for their own gain, and the salesman is using them for the gain of their fiduciary. Have integrity. You will learn that you can really, really use these tools and influence people's behavior. Do it for the right reasons, right? There are a lot of people who have been taken advantage of because people have mastered these skills. Some of the greatest cons of the world. God, I think about Jeffrey Epstein, and it makes me sick to my stomach. But I can tell you this, he's mastered this stuff. Now he's gone. We don't have to worry about him the same way. But you hear what I'm saying. Learn this stuff and use it the right way, and you will help people change their lives. So that said, I'm going to ask for a couple of ahas. Any light bulbs today? Anything you're feeling different about today? To have to listen to me jabber for 2 straight hours, y'all should get a Nobel Prize. But I really, really, this is something that I'm so passionate about, and I hope you become as well. But give me some takeaways. Anything that you heard today, any of these tools that kind of are new to you that make you think differently about this?
want to just point out something. I was in another class with David Radney, and we're discussing about um, uh, the FISBOs and how to go after them. And I heard from the other experienced realtors that, they got backlash. They were rude to them, and, the agents felt bad. But, how to stay positive and use your tonal voice, still like making sound. I mean, from inside you might be like, oh my God, I can't take this anymore, but you have to still maintain your tonal voice, and maintain professionalism, and still come out, smiling, and, trying to just let them know that you're helping out and not
Yeah.
anything else, So that's my thing, is like tonal voice and maintaining your calmness. And um, over the phone, they cannot see how angry you are on your face, but your tonal voice can actually create. My daughter always says that you're yelling at me at 1 second, and then you get a phone call
Yeah.
and you're so sweet on the phone. How do you change that?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, here's the thing. People get angry at us and they're mean to us and they're bad to us and they push back because they don't like us. They don't not like you. They don't know you. They don't like salespeople because salespeople historically have not been great. They've been jerky. They've been pushy. They've been all this stuff. And I can understand where they're coming from. And so when you get that kind of a thing, the best way to manage it, I think, is to understand where it's coming from and to be compassionate. And I would move right into an accusation audit. I bet you think that we're all the same. You must, judging by the tone of your voice, you must really despise real estate agents. You must think we're all a bunch of bloodsuckers. Whatever it is, I'm going to go right with it and maintain my tone. I'm going to go right with it and identify all the things, the ugly things that I think they're feeling about me, which is causing them to want to hurt me. And once I do that, I know that they're going to begin to calm down. And they may hang up. They could just hang up, and that happens. But I got a better chance if I move right into the accusation audit, start to just diffuse that. And here's what you're likely to hear. You know what? You're right. That's exactly what I think. That's exactly what I think. And then now they're less emotional, and I can start to have a conversation as it sounds like you've really had some bad experiences. What's happened in those bad experiences? And now we're talking, right? And so these are just little tweaks, right? These are little things, but they're powerful things, right?
Thank you. It is powerful.
Yeah. All right. Guys, I'm going to wrap it up here. It's after 3. I'll record this. This will show up online later tonight or tomorrow morning.